For some, autumn comes early, stays late through life where October follows September and November touches October, and then instead of December and Christ's birth, there is no Bethlehem star, no rejoicing, but September comes again, old October, and so on down the years, with no winter, spring, or revivifying summer. For these beings, fall is the ever-normal season, the only weather. There is no choice beyond. Where do they come from? The dust. Where do they go? The grave. Does blood stir their veins? No, the night wind. What ticks in their head? The worm. What speaks from their mouth? The toad. What sees from their eye? The snake. What hears with their ear? The abyss between the stars. They sift the human storm for souls, eat flesh of reason, fill tombs with sinners. They frenzy forth, in gusts they beetle scurry, creep, thread, filter, motion, make all moons sullen, and surely cloud all clear run waters. The spiderweb hears them, trembles, breaks. Such are the autumn people. Beware of them.
Hi y'all, welcome to the Horror Diner. If you've dined with us before, welcome back. We're so happy to see you again. You're looking sharp. Is that a new shirt? But if this is your first time here at the diner, come on in. We're thrilled you decided to stop by. I'm Spooky Pie, your waitress, your chef, and your new friend who's going to sit down and talk about horror with you. Here at the Horror Diner, we talk about any kind of horror media that you can think of. Books, movies, podcasts, video games, TV shows, other things I can't think of off the top of my head. But basically, if it's horror, then it's fair game. Everything is on the menu. But wait, there's more. Every episode, we also cook up a little something that goes with the piece of media we're talking about. Sometimes that's easier than others, and other times a work won't mention food at all, and we'll have to get creative on what our themed eat is, but we're nothing if not adaptable here. As of recording this, it's November, which means it's smack in the middle of fall, the actual best season of the year, which you wouldn't know because everyone is already putting up their Christmas decorations. While I'm cradling my jack-o'-lanterns and crying because, dear God, give a girl 2 seconds to enjoy fall. It's fall until December 21st. Leave me alone. If I haven't clued you in enough already, fall is my favorite season. It always has been. Part of that is because it's the season that houses Halloween, but also because it's when you start to get the first crisp chill in the air. The leaves start changing color, the air is charged. Autumn has always felt magical to me. Granted, I do currently live somewhere where seasons virtually do not exist, and it's only been the past week we've gotten any weather at all that is under 75 degrees, but it's the principle of the thing. As such, I've always been drawn to media that loves autumn as much as I do, which is how at a young age I came to love Something Wicked This Way Comes. For those not familiar with the work, Something Wicked This Way Comes is a 1962 horror novel written by Ray Bradbury that was later adapted, by Disney of all things, into a film in 1983. If that seems weird, it's because it is. But it was a pretty weird time for the Walt Disney Company. The 1970s saw movies like Star Wars and Jaws become the big hip thing that teens were into, and Disney's normal live-action fare up to that point wasn't seen as hip or edgy enough for this new crowd of cool kids in the 70s and 80s. Coupled with the fact that the late 60s and early 70s had seen the deaths of both Walt and Roy Disney, the company was struggling with what direction to take. During this turbulent time, along came Ron Miller as the new president of the Disney Company. Looking at the current media landscape, he came to the conclusion that the age group we typically appeal to just won't give us the big attendance numbers that other studios get. And Miller's plan was basically, hey man, we'll just get edgy too. Which led to a really strange period in Disney's history that produced some of the darkest movies that were still, somehow, meant to be marketed to children. This gave us horror gems like The Watcher in the Woods, a movie mired in controversy where it only played in theaters for 11 days before it was pulled and the ending was completely redone. That's a story for another day. The similarly, unfortunately edited to hell, Black Cauldron, Return to Oz, which I don't know a person who saw that movie as a kid who wasn't traumatized, and last but not least, Something Wicked This Way Comes. But when you think about it, a Ray Bradbury story being adapted into a Disney film does actually make a bit more sense than some of the other dark works they were producing. After all, Bradbury himself did have a history with Walt Disney. He cited his love of Halloween being started with the 1929 Silly Symphony Skeleton Dance cartoon, and was good friends with Walt Disney himself. Bradbury had even been brought on for Disney projects in the past. He consulted on the parks, and he even wrote the original script for Spaceship Earth. He's even got a tree in Disneyland dedicated to him, inspired by his story, The Halloween Tree. It gets decorated for Halloween every year with hanging jack-o'-lanterns. It's neat! And the trajectory of Something Wicked becoming a film was always planned, even if not necessarily by Disney. It began life as a treatment he was working on for Gene Kelly, and when Kelly couldn't get any studios to bite, it became a short story called The Black Ferris. This story, while shorter, shares some of the anatomy of what would ultimately become Something Wicked This Way Comes. The ride that could age or de-age a person was always part of it, though originally, as the title suggests, a Ferris wheel instead of a carousel. The protagonists were two young boys still, though with different names and quite different personalities, and the plot points of Miss Foley being duped into taking care of a de-aged version of Mr. Cougar carried over into the final book, as well as Mr. Cougar's fate. If you've already read, watched, or done both with Something Wicked This Way Comes, it's interesting to give The Black Ferris a read to see how it began in life, and it is available for free online, so you have no excuse not to. Also, as a side note, Ray Bradbury was just kind of an awesome person. I met him when I was little and he drew a dinosaur for me, and my mom was so jealous. Hi, Mom. Moving on, lest you think I'm a Disney adult from this preamble here, and I don't know why you would get that idea. I'm sure this info dump has made you hungry, so before I talk your ear off some more, let's head over to the kitchen and fix you something to eat.
An obvious issue I ran into with Something Wicked This Way Comes is that there really isn't any mention of food, but it does take place at a turn-of-the-century carnival. So after doing a little digging into what would have been on offer at a carnival in the early 20th century, I landed on popcorn balls.
My food is problematic.
Lots of non-essential ingredients were expensive and hard to get at the time, so simpler fare was a lot more common. But I wanted to do a little bit of a twist, so I'm making peanut butter popcorn balls. So let's get cooking. You will need 20 cups of popped popcorn, making sure there are no unpopped kernels, 1/4 cup butter, 2/3 cup corn syrup, 1 cup brown sugar, and 1 cup smooth peanut butter. Get a large saucepan and over medium heat, combine your brown sugar, corn syrup, and butter. Stir those around and let them cook. You'll want to let the mixture come to a rolling boil. Once it does, turn off the heat and add in your peanut butter, and stir it in until it's smooth. Add the peanut butter mixture to your popcorn. I didn't have a big enough bowl to hold all 20 cups of popcorn, so I had to divide it between 2 mixing bowls. Using a spatula, toss the popcorn with the peanut butter mixture until it's evenly coated. If it isn't, the night manager will know, for he sees all and will report your failings to the old ones. Put on some latex gloves to keep your hands clean and safe. You can also, apparently, butter your hands and do it without gloves, but I cannot tell you how little I wanted to do that. Go ahead and form the popcorn mixture into balls that are roughly the size of smaller softballs, and set them on a wax paper lined baking sheet. Be sure to check with your supervisor that you are doing it correctly. He will let you know if you're not. Never undergo a dangerous cooking venture without night manager supervision. Once you're done, you should have roughly 16 balls in total. Unless you ate some of the popcorn mixture while you're working, and if you did, no one can judge you. Look how cute these little guys look. After all the popcorn balls are formed, you'll want to let them set up and cool for at least 30 minutes. So while they're doing that, let's head over to my office.
Look it, my set has a little carousel. It's on theme. How is it on theme, you ask? I don't know, only because Something Wicked This Way Comes is the origin of the creepy carousel trope. So, thanks to Ray Bradbury, we have the amazing, deeply aesthetic memory of a Lessa fight from Silent Hill 3. Please go watch my Silent Hill 3 video if you haven't already. While Something Wicked This Way Comes birthed the creepy carousel trope, and certainly was at the forefront of dark carnival stories, credit for the star of the trope, likely, lies with the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. But if you go looking for the dark carnival trope online, Something Wicked is going to be one of the first things mentioned 9 out of 10 times. It probably doesn't hurt that the leader of this particular carnival is literally named Mr. Dark, and the carnival itself is a pretty clever vehicle for a horror story set in the turn of the century. Something Wicked is thought to take place between 1910 and 1930, setting it during or only just before the Great Depression, a time when traveling carnivals were extremely popular due to being relatively cheap entertainment at a time when people had very little disposable income for leisure, and escapism at a time when life was hard and bleak. Carnivals offered a glimpse at things people would otherwise not get to experience, and made a space outside of normal reality. Because of this, carnivals have always been associated with a level of fantasy, and since carnivals created this sort of liminal space that existed in between the harshness of reality and a world of imagination, making your story hinge on a carnival that exploited that escapism and twisted dreams is pretty clever. Sure, the whole concept of something that seemed friendly or nostalgic actually being bad is not rare at all now, it's a whole genre, but that's now. Not to mention that part of our continued fascination with carnivals stems from the juxtaposition of that aforementioned escapism with the idea of something being dark and potentially dangerous just below the surface. To quote W. Scott Poole,
"The carnival seems more enticing precisely because it's not a safe place. You might get hurt, you might see something you can't unsee. There lives, somewhere in our psyches where it has crouched on its haunches since the earliest human experience, a yearning from the taboo and the terrible."
And in theme with my previous whinging about my inability to let go of autumn, what feels more like autumn than a carnival rolling into town? Which is, of course, my clumsy segue into my summary section. As per usual, spoiler warnings are in effect. If you want to skip the summary and not be spoiled, jump to the timestamp below. I'm going to be talking about both the novel and the film adaptation, though, since it is a more in-depth and robust story, I will be doing a full breakdown of the novel plot, and then afterwards noting the changes that were made by the film. So, basically, I'm spoiling both, and this is your last chance to bail out before I do. For everyone else who is still here, let's get into it. Our novel opens on the quintessential postcard turn-of-the-century American small town of Greentown, Illinois, and a traveling lightning rod salesman coming upon our two main protagonists, two 13-year-old boys named Will Holloway and Jim Nightshade. These boys are simultaneously complete opposites and inseparable best friends. Will is fair-haired and light-eyed, while Jim is dark-haired and green-eyed. Will was born 1 minute before midnight on October 30th, and Jim was born 1 minute after midnight on October 31st. They live next door to each other, have been best friends their whole lives, and come as a bonded pair, you must adopt both. Anyway, the lightning rod salesman, whose name is Tom Fury because everyone in this book just has immensely narrative names, says he can tell that one of their two houses is going to be struck by lightning in the coming storm. When pressed by the boys, he identifies Jim's house, and then gives him a lightning rod for free when it becomes obvious that, like most 13-year-olds, Jim is broke. After acquiring said lightning rod, the boys run off to town to meet our secondary main character, Charles Holloway, Will's father, who works at the library. A recurring theme is immediately established when we meet Charles, in that Will thinks his dad is old, and Charles himself thinks he's old. This is going to be Charles' main thing throughout the whole story. He thinks he's old. He's 54, he's not really particularly old. But I guess this was roughly Depression-era America, where your life expectancy was 57 to 63 years old ballpark, so I guess there's that. Charles has a lot of wistful thinking about being young that almost seems to border on resenting his son as he watches Jim and Will run off after they've picked out their library books. We'll get much more of Charles and his relationship with age as the story goes on. We'll get a lot more about people and their relationship with age in general as the story goes on. On their way home, Will and Jim catch a paper flyer blown to them on the wind.
"Coming October 24th. Their lips moved, shadowing the words set in Rococo type. Cougar and Dark's Carnival. October 24th, that's tomorrow. It can't be, said Will. All carnivals stop after Labor Day. Who cares? 1001 Wonders? See Mephistophely, the lava drinker. Mr. Electrico, the monster Montgolfier? Balloon, said Will. A Montgolfier is a balloon. Mademoiselle Tarot, read Jim. The dangling man, the demon guillotine, the illustrated man. Hey, that's just an old guy with tattoos. No, breathed Jim, warm on the paper. He's illustrated. Special. See? Covered with monsters. A menagerie. Jim's eyes jumped. See? The skeleton. Ain't that fine, Will? Not a thin man, no, but skeleton. See? The dust witch. That was born in the dust, raised in the dust, and someday winds up back in the dust. Hear more. Egyptian mirror maze. See yourself 10,000 times. St. Anthony's Temple of Temptation. The most beautiful, read Will. Woman in the world, finished Jim. They looked at each other. The handbill blew over the trees and away in an idiot caper, gone. It's not true anyway, Will gasped. Carnivals don't come this late in the year. Silly darn sounding thing. Who'd go to it? Me. Jim stood quiet in the dark.
The boys finally make it home after hotly debating whether or not a carnival could actually be coming. Jim goes back to his house with his single mother, and Will back to his home with two parents. After getting ready for bed, Will can hear his parents talking. His dad is talking about, you guessed it, how old he feels like he is. He has grievances because he was 40 when Will was born, which again, not old, but I guess life was hard and life expectancies were low, so I'll cut him some slack. He's also a decade or so older than his wife. So Will overhears Charles whinging on about how he's too old to play baseball with his son, and how people think his wife is his daughter when they're seen in public together. Wonderful things for a kid to overhear. You know, how your dad blames you for making him feel old. Something you totally have control over. Super. Healthy. We love it. Midnight rolls around, and both boys in their respective houses hear the far-off sound of a train rolling into town. This gives the boys pause for a hot moment. After all, carnivals roll in at dawn, not the middle of the night. And the boys kind of shout this across the way through their respective windows at each other. But that's totally a train, and that's totally circus music coming in with it.
The train itself appeared, link by link, engine, coal car, and numerous and numbered, all asleep and slumbering, dream-filled cars that followed the firefly-sparked churn, chant, drowsy autumn hearth-fire roar. Hellfires flushed the stunned hills. Even at this remote view, one imagined men with buffalo-haunched arms shoveling black meteor falls of coal into the open boilers of the engine. The engine, both boys vanished, came back to lift binoculars. The engine. Civil War, no other stack like that since 1900. The rest of the train, all of it's old. The flags, the cages, it's the carnival. They listened. At first Will thought he heard the air whistling fast in his nostrils, but no, it was the train, and the calliope sighing, weeping on that train. Off in night country, panting, churning, was this funeral train, all black-plumed cars, licorice-lined cages, and sooty calliope clamoring, banging 3 different hymns mixed and lost, maybe not there at all.
So, Carnival is here, and Jim Nightshade is tearing ass out of his house, which means that Will is also tearing ass out into the night because he follows Jim wherever Jim goes. The boys run out to the edge of town as the train is pulling in, and no one is playing the calliope, but it's going, and it's terrifying, and the train's whistle sounds like the protests of a billion people dead or dying, not wanting to be dead. Listen, people just don't write like Ray Bradbury did. He was fantastic. I know some people get prissy about his use of prose, but I think it's beautiful, and this is my show, and I like Ray Bradbury. So there. So the boys watch the carnival be set up in the dark and are really freaked out. Everything looks weirder and more unsettling in the dark, and they're already pretty unsettled by the whole thing. So they watch the setup for a while and then bolt into the night to get back into their beds. I will also note here, before we get too deep in, that there's been 2 scenes I don't want to spend too much time on, but have a tiny bit of bearing on the plot. There were 2 short scenes in which both Tom Fury and Charles Holloway have separately come across ads for the carnival that boasted having the most beautiful woman in the world. These ads are both pasted on the window of an empty storefront that has a block of ice that kind of resembles a coffin, and there seems like there might be someone in that ice. Charles manages to shake off his curiosity to know what the most beautiful woman trapped in the ice looks like, and goes home to his wife and kid. Tom can't help the curiosity and goes in to see her, and that's the end of his chapter. We don't know what happened to him when he saw her, but we guess it's not great. Moving on. The next morning, the boys are shook up and not sure if they had a shared nightmare or not about what they had seen the night before. So they head back to see the carnival during the day, and it looks weirdly normal? Just your standard flat rides and typical carnival fare? They're confused and a little irate about it because what do you mean it's just a normal carnival? What the heck? This is also where we meet a relatively important secondary character, Miss Foley, who is their 7th grade teacher. She's at the carnival looking for her nephew who has just come to stay with her. She can't find him anywhere, but decides, oh well, maybe she'll check out the mirror maze while she's waiting for him to turn up. Will immediately has a bad feeling about this and asks her to please not do that, but she basically goes, what? No, that's silly, I have a ticket, I'm going in, and does it. And what do you know? It goes badly for her. Shock. Miss Foley starts having an absolute meltdown and has to be pulled out of the maze by Will. She's grateful to be saved, but keeps going on about a girl who's trapped and drowning in there. She's insisting that someone has to help that girl who is lost in the mirror maze, who no one but her has seen. When the boys press her for what the girl she saw in the maze looks like, she replies, the fact is, she looked like myself many, many years ago. She's really shaken up but manages to wander home. Will is like, yikes, who would want to go into that god-awful mirror maze? And Jim is just like, yeah, who'd want to do that? That would be crazy. But the boys decide they're going to hide and stay after the carnival closes to see what happens, which is so smart. Will loses Jim for a bit and has to haul him out of that mirror maze he had absolutely no interest going into, and they also stumble across the lightning rod salesman's bag just discarded in the carnival, which is surely not ominous, and certainly he's fine wherever he is. So the boys prowl around all the closed rides and attractions until they get to the carousel, which has had an out-of-order sign on it all day, but Jim determines that it doesn't look broken to him and decides to get on it. This doesn't last very long before they're both apprehended by a beefy ginger man with bright blue eyes, who's none too pleased that these little hoodlums have broken in after hours. But this is when Tumblr sexy man and main antagonist of the story, Mr. Dark, swans in, and tells the large man, Mr. Cougar of the aforementioned Cougar and Dark's Carnival, to put the boys down. Mr. Dark is a sharp-dressed man who is absolutely festooned in tattoos, played in the movie by young, hot Jonathan Pryce. And you know what? Okay, don't at me. Jonathan Pryce was hot in this movie. If you only know him from Pirates of the Caribbean, that's not my problem. He was hot. Do your research. Anyway, hot boy Mr. Dark seems sympathetic that the boys were only curious, although he really seems to only have any interest at all in Jim. He shows Jim a few magic tricks, asks him his name, to which Jim lies and says his name is Simon, and then sends the boys on their way. And they absolutely go home like they are told to, like well-behaved boys. Except, no, they don't. They go hide up a tree to see what Cougar and Dark are doing, because something is definitely up with this perfectly normal carnival. While they're hiding up said tree, they watch as Mr. Cougar gets on the carousel, and they start running the carousel backwards with a familiar but discordant song being played backwards as well. Each time Mr. Cougar goes around the carousel, he gets a year younger. The carousel makes 28 rotations before it stops, and a 12-year-old version of Mr. Cougar gets off and sprints off into the night. They decide they need to follow the weird fake child.
Devil baby!
And along the way, Will realizes that the song the carousel was playing was the funeral march just run backwards, as it is marched away from the grave. Which is definitely creepy, but we don't have time for that, because the weird little boy who's actually a man has stopped at Miss Foley's house. And Jim and Will realize this adult child is pretending to be the nephew she mentioned looking for earlier. They go to warn Miss Foley that something is wrong, but don't say anything more specific than carnival bad when the boy says he's taking Aunt Willow to the carnival tomorrow. And since the boys obviously don't have evidence of why carnival bad, and there's no way telling her, hey, your nephew's actually a 40-year-old man who rode a carousel is going to be believed, they drop it and leave. They get home late. They're in big trouble. They're both sent to bed with no dinner. Will overhears his dad stop just short of saying that he never should have had him. It's a really great night for everyone involved. But Jim sneaks back out after lights out to go see the weird man boy, Mr. Cougar, again, and Will of course follows because that's what Will does. He manages to catch up to Jim and confront him about what in the world he could possibly want to see that weird guy about. Which is when Will figures out that Jim means to ride the carousel forwards in order to grow up faster, ostensibly leaving his best friend who he's minutes apart in age with behind. Will is not having it, and they get into a brawl on the lawn in front of Miss Foley's house. Their act of pandemonium is observed by the man-child, who uses this opportunity to break a window in Miss Foley's house, toss out some of her jewelry onto the lawn, and then holler that they're being robbed to frame the boys who are obviously onto a secret. Then the weird, not little boy runs off into the night. Will and Jim book it because they know there's no way the authorities are going to believe two kids talking about evil carnivals and kids who are really grown men. And also because they want to catch up with Cougar and have him tell them what is even going on here. They chase him all the way to the carnival, and when they get there they see the carousel running, forwards this time, and Will has to basically body check Jim off of getting on the carousel. All the while, Cougar is riding the carousel and aging back up again. While Jim is too busy being butthurt that Will won't let him skip the cutscenes and be an adult already, Will is concerned that as soon as Cougar reaches his normal age again, he'll be huge and strong and is going to murder them. So, he decides that they've got to sabotage the carousel to stop that from happening. But Jim is hell-bent on riding the damn thing, and mad as hell that Will is trying to ruin it, so they get another kerfuffle while Will is trying to man the carousel controls, which leads to them accidentally throwing the thing into overdrive with no way of stopping it. The carousel whips around at breakneck speeds, so many times the boys lose count, all the while Cougar is getting older until he is just old as dirt, basically. At first they think they've straight up murdered him because he's almost a fully decayed skeleton, but then he breathes. It's that scene from Seven that bothers everyone, before Seven even existed. Note to my editor, I'm not going to make you watch Seven for this bit. If people know, they know, and if they don't, they're better for it. Anyway, he's only mostly dead.
Well, it just so happens that your friend here is only mostly dead.
There's a big difference between mostly dead and all dead.
But the boys, not being monsters and thinking that they may have very well killed a man, or at least mostly killed a man,
Mostly dead? He's slightly alive.
come back with police because they're young and sweet and naive and believe the police will actually do something. But of course, Mr. Dark is as clever as he is hot, and he's figured they'd be coming, and he's ready. He has a whole elaborate setup with the now old as heck Mr. Cougar in an electric chair, saying that they're practicing the new act. And all the other carnival performers are also present. Among them is someone who looks oddly like the lightning rod salesman, only shrunk down and driven mad. This is also where we get our first glimpse of the Dust Witch, an old woman whose eyes are sewn shut but can see the future. But anyway, Mr. Dark fully pulls the wool over the police eyes with his whole practicing our new act and everyone here is totally fine spiel, like that's, hard. And the cops buy it because, of course they do, and basically just go, oh, you kids and your imaginations, while Mr. Dark ominously gives the boys dozens of free passes to come back and ride all the rides to show that there are no hard feelings. Which seems a lot less fun when you realize that all the attractions are basically there to do something horrible to you. So the boys are sent on their way, but that night, after they go to bed, the boys sense something strange outside. There's a big ominous hot air balloon in the night sky, and the Dust Witch is inside of it. She sails over the boys' houses and seems to have marked their roofs before leaving. Clearly, this is to let the rest of the carnival know where the boys live. Will is clever, though, and they hose off their roofs and then return back to bed. But Will can see even though the Dust Witch hasn't moved on, she hasn't returned to the carnival yet and is floating around. And he knows he has to stop her from reporting back to the carnival. So Will, for once, goes out on his own with his bow and arrow from Boy Scout archery and sets out to shoot down the balloon. It goes pretty poorly for a while, but Will does actually manage to pop the hot air balloon and shoot the witch off down the road. As the entirety of chapter 31 says, nothing much else happened all the rest of the night. The next day there's a storm, and when the boys go out walking in the rain, they find a little girl crying. They've never seen this girl before, but she seems familiar. When they approach, though, she recognizes them and calls them by name. Jim is freaked out and wants nothing to do with this, but Will is the more compassionate one, and he recognizes that this little girl used to be Miss Foley and promises to try and help her. When she asks him who will ever believe her, he tells her that he does, because Will is a very good boy. It takes longer for Jim to come around, but he is eventually convinced about the little girl's identity.
They both heard the music blowing through the front door with the smell of fresh rain and ancient grass. The carousel calliope among the hills, piping the funeral march backwards. Jim opened the door wider and stood in the music as one stands in the rain. The merry-go-round, they fixed it. Will nodded. She must have heard the music, gone out at sunrise. Something went wrong. Maybe the carousel wasn't fixed right. Maybe accidents happen all the time. Like to the lightning rod man, him inside out and crazy. Maybe the carnival likes accidents, gets a kick out of them. Or maybe they did something to her on purpose. Maybe they wanted to know more about us, our names, where we live, or wanted her to help them hurt us. Who knows what? Maybe she got suspicious or scared. Then they just gave her more than she ever wanted or asked for.
It's shortly after they have this realization that they hear music in town. There's a parade going down the streets, but it isn't really a parade. It's the carnival out searching for Will and Jim under the guise of a parade. So the boys know they need to hide. Will manages to use a phone in a store to quickly call his father and let him know they have to go into hiding, but no further details. Jim and Will hide under an open grate in the street, while Charles Holloway saunters into town. Mr. Dark is going around asking people about Will and Jim, saying they've been selected for a major prize and they just want to make sure the boys get it. Charles might not have any idea what's going on, but he has a bad feeling about the whole thing. He manages to figure out where the boys are hiding and casually tells them to meet him at the library tonight so they can figure out what to do, just before Mr. Dark approaches him. Charles is smart enough to not tell Mr. Dark anything, but Mr. Dark is also smart enough to know Charles is lying to him and gets angry. And in a real fit of stupid, when asked, Charles tells Mr. Dark his name and where he works so this handsome serial killer can find him more easily. Kind of a dumb move, Mr. Holloway, but whatever, man, I'm not your mom. Anyway, the boys hide in their trash hole until enough time has passed and they can sneak to the library and meet Charles. They tell Charles everything, and in rare defiance of a horror trope, he believes them. This may have been helped by how shifty Mr. Dark was acting, but it's still rare, and good, because this far into the story would grind the whole thing to a halt if we had to go through a whole, oh, I think you kids are overreacting kind of nonsense. It also turns out in the time between when Charles has last seen the boys and now, he's been doing his research. and there's more to this carnival than they originally thought. It seems the carnival has been showing up every 20 or so years, always the same names, but so far apart that the people of the town forgot. Charles has pulled out decades worth of newspapers, 1846, 1860, 1888, 1910, always in October, always cougar and dark. This is where we get the quote about the autumn people from the opening of the video. So, like good horror protagonists, they're doing their research, because you need to know your enemy. And what they know is that this is a cycle. Every few decades, the carnival returns to feed on misery and the stolen dreams of the people who enter the carnival. And then when they've had their fill, they disappear again until the next cycle starts. It's pretty easy to keep doing this for centuries when you have a carousel that can rewind time and keep you young forever.
"Where'd they come from?" asked Jim. "Who are they?" Will went to the window with his father, and both looked out, and Charles Holloway said to those far tents, "Maybe once it was just one man walking Europe, jingling his ankle bells, a lute on his shoulder making a hunchback shadow before Columbus. Maybe a man walked around in a monkey skin 1,000,000 years ago, stuffing himself with other people's unhappiness, chewed their pain all day like spearmint gum for the sweet savor, and trotted faster, revivified by personal disaster. Maybe his son after him refined his father's deadfalls, man-traps, bone-crunchers, head-achers, flesh-twitchers, soul-skinners. These laid scum on lonely ponds which came vinegar gnats to snuff up noses, mosquitoes to ride summer night flesh and sting forth those bumps that carnival phrenologists dearly love to fondle and prophesy upon. So from one man here, one man there, walking as swift as his oily glances, it became scuttles of dogmen begging gifts of trouble, pandering misery, seeking under carpets for centipede treads, watchful of night sweats, hearkening by all bedroom doors to hear men twist, basting themselves with remorse and warm water dreams. The stuff of nightmare is their plain bread. They butter it with pain. They set their clocks by death watch beetles and thrive the centuries. They were the men with the leather ribbon whips who sweated up the pyramid, seasoning it with other people's salt and other people's cracked hearts. They coursed Europe on the white horses of the plague. They whispered to Caesar that he was mortal, then sold daggers at half price in the Grand March sale. Some must have been lazing clowns, foot props for emperors, princes, and epileptic popes. Their populations grew as the world grew, spread, and there was more delicious variety of pain to thrive on. The train put wheels under them, and here they run down the long road out of the Gothic and Baroque. Look at their wagons and coaches, the carving like medieval shrines. All of it stuff once drawn by horses, mules, or maybe men.
The guys are really getting somewhere in this mystery, which is of course when Mr. Dark, who Charles totally didn't tell his full legal name and where to find him to, shows up looking for the boys. He offers Charles a bargain to rewind time and make him younger if he just tells him where the boys are. Charles is good and sticks to his guns, which Mr. Dark is not happy about, so he more or less kicks Charles's ass, breaking his hand and knocking him to the ground, and then goes and finds the boys anyway. He's brought the Dust Witch along because of course he has, and she spells the boys so that they're unable to speak or even see, and can't do much but be led around by Mr. Dark. He takes the boys, and as he's leaving, tells her to take care of Charles. And she's absolutely going to. She starts using her magic to slow down his heart, but he manages to save himself by finding the whole thing ridiculous somehow and laughing at her, which completely nullifies her ability to cast spells on him and seems to actually physically affect her, and she ends up running from him, leaving him very much still alive. We cut to Mr. Dark arriving back at the carnival with the boys, while in the background the now wounded Dust Witch limps onto the grounds. Mr. Dark parks the boys in the wax museum and takes to the stage at the center of the carnival to wow and amaze the throng of onlookers that have assembled. He has a very special performance for them today, the world-famous bullet trick starring Mademoiselle Tarot, aka the Dust Witch. She doesn't want to and has to tell Mr. Dark that she couldn't finish off Charles, which makes him just angrier and more keen to proceed with the act, calling for a volunteer from the audience to fire a rifle at the Dust Witch, who is, supposedly, going to catch the bullet. And it's kind of clear that this is punishment for her not killing off Charles when she was supposed to, who, speak of the devil, is here now and volunteers to fire the rifle. He also pretty cleverly says that since his hand is busted, he'll need help holding the rifle, and says his son will help him, forcing Mr. Dark to let Will come up with him or else make everyone think something fishy is going on here. Charles is instructed to mark the bullet he'll be firing with his initials and instead carves a crescent moon. He also knows how the trick works and knows that somehow a trick wax bullet will have been slipped into the rifle while Mr. Dark will take the real one to the Dust Witch so it can appear like she caught to the audience. Not giving the trick up, but still playing his own game, Charles says he needs to make sure the bullet is marked clearly and puts the same marking into the wax bullet he'll be firing at her. Before he fires, Charles whispers to himself so that the witch can read his lips that the crescent moon he has marked the bullets with are meant to be his smile. And even though the bullet in the rifle is wax and fake, when it fires, it absolutely murders the Dust Witch, in turn breaking the spells over Will and Jim that made them unable to speak or see. So Will is free, but Jim hasn't shown himself yet. Charles and Will go searching for him, only to find him being lured into the mirror maze by a man's voice. So both Charles and Will have to go chasing into the mirror maze to save Jim, which turns out to not be great for Charles because a place full of mirrors forces him to look at himself and to deal with what's been his big issue through the whole story, the idea that he thinks he's old, especially when Will is reflected right there next to him. But at its heart, this is a story about good and evil, and usually good overcoming evil. So Will proclaiming that how old Charles thinks he is has never mattered to Will and that Will loves him, breaks the spell and shatters all the mirror in the mirror maze, freeing them from it. Once outside, they can hear the calliope and know that the carousel is being fired up again. And of course, there's Jim walking towards the carousel like he's been trying to do since the start. He manages to get on, with Will running alongside it trying to get him off of it, and Charles trying to figure out how to get the carousel to stop. Jim goes around a few times before he seems to figure out where he is and what is going on, and hears Will trying to get him to come off. Eventually, Will has to get on the carousel and pull Jim off, which, as you can imagine, doesn't go great. Will has gotten Jim off the carousel, but now it looks like Jim is probably incredibly dead. But, at the same time, there's another young boy who no one has seen before this point who has appeared and is calling for help, claiming that the man with the tattoos is after him. Charles is wise to this, though, and pulls the kid's sleeve up to show tattoos, and he's just Mr. Dark gone backwards on the carousel. And in one of the strangest villain deaths in any media I've encountered, Charles hugs the child Mr. Dark and kills him with love, I guess. I know there's a deeper message here, but he does basically hug a child to death, which might be why they changed that in the movie, but we'll get there in a minute. Dark is defeated, which also freed all the people trapped by the carnival, but Jim is still probably dead. Much like how he defeated the Dust Witch in the library, Charles determines the only way to bring Jim back is through joy and not sorrow, so he more or less bullies Will into being cheerful, because pain and sadness is what the carnival feeds on, so the two of them are basically running around yelling and singing until this brings Jim back to life. Yes, I know how weird that sounds. We're almost through this though, so stick with me a bit longer. The carnival is more or less defeated, although Charles does warn that something like this is never truly gone, and something else may take its place. But for the second time in a row on this channel, we get a happy ending, where the three of them race back to town, and Charles doesn't feel old, and Jim and Will are more or less back to normal, and it's just an ordinary October night. The end of the book. But before I let everyone who's avoiding spoilers back in the room, I want to touch a little bit on the differences in the film adaptation versus the book. The first, and most obvious, is that while the majority of the story beats are the same, there is a decided difference in tone between the two. The novel is more straightforward horror that just happens to be starring children, but is not necessarily for children. Much like works like Black Phone or It, where the protagonist is a child, it doesn't mean it's meant for children. Whereas the film, even though as part of Disney's aforementioned edgy era, was still intended to appeal to families, so it's more of a middle grade horror than the novel because of that. Which is not to say that there are too many things in the novel that are outrightly mature and adult, but there is more violence, and the darker tones are more obvious, and while cryptic, there are a few suggestive scenes in there, like the implication that the boys at one point in the past have observed an orgy through a neighbor's window. Beyond a tone shift, when Something Wicked was made into a film, there were definitely a handful of changes made. But I will admit, while I adore the movie, a lot of those changes don't entirely make sense to me. In the film, Jim is older than Will, completely disregarding the intentional thematic choice of having the boys each be born on either side of Halloween, and Will being slightly older being another thing that makes Jim jealous of him. In the film, Jim is older, and that's billed as why Will is chasing him all the time and is afraid of being left behind, and not the other way in the novel, where Jim being younger is another chip on his shoulder and another thing he feels like he's missing out on or being deprived of. In the book, the most beautiful woman in the world is more of an idea than anything else. Something vague you never really see that is meant to tempt men like Charles and Tom Fury. In the movie, not only do you see her, they combined her role with the Dust Witch, so instead of the idea of the beautiful woman in the ice and the juxtaposition of the crone figure with the stitched eyes, you get one hot witch played by Pam Grier, which... okay.
On the subject of the Dust Witch, the scene where she hunts for the boys in the balloon was changed for the film. This was largely due to budget and graphic constraints at the time, though possibly also due to the changes they had made to the character of the Dust Witch. But mostly it was money. Basically, they looked at the hot air balloon scene and went, we can't afford that, but you know what we can afford? Spiders.
So you've brought approximately 200,000 spiders into our home, which is a cool thing.
Right. This one
Oh, that's such a big spider. Hey, I just had an interesting thought. Yeah, actually, fuck this.
So instead of a hot air balloon, we instead get Jim's room being filled with spiders. Because that's the same thing, right?
One time I saw a video of a rancho molt its skin, and my eyes went to hell.
The movie leans much more heavily into the monkey's paw / be careful what you wish for element, since it is multiple people in the town have dreams that get fulfilled, but with a twist. The owner of the cigar shop, the town bartender, and the barber all get pulled in and their dreams twisted, and ultimately are made into parts of the carnival. Instead of it just being Tom Fury and Miss Foley in the novel, Miss Foley, for that matter, has a different fate. In the movie, she begs to be young and beautiful again, and gets that wish only to be turned blind so she can't look at her own face, as opposed to the book where she's given back her youth but made so young as to not be believed by anyone who might help her. She also doesn't lose her eyesight in the novel, she just becomes a child. Tom Fury's fate is also a bit different in the movie. He takes the place of Mr. Cougar as Electrico, being the man that can withstand being pumped full of electricity, which does make sense as a sort of irony to him being a lightning rod salesman. Also, the scene where Charles kills the Dust Witch with the fake bullet is removed entirely, and Tom Fury throws a spear at her, and that's how she dies. Sure. Charles, in general, is the most changed. In the book, the biggest issue he has is the idea of age, and that is still present in the movie, but the film introduces this plot where Charles's biggest issue with why he can't face Will is because when Will was young, he fell into a river and Charles was too afraid to save him, and Jim's father was who rescued him. And the shame of that is his biggest issue to get over.
My new prison is shame!
In the Hall of Mirrors, the issue isn't having to face his age, it's seeing Will almost drowned over and over. And it isn't Will dispelling his fear that his life is over, he's too old, it's Will forgiving him for not saving his life. And while it does cinematically make for a pretty cool looking scene in the Hall of Mirrors, I'm not totally clear on why this change was made. The other large difference to the movie I kind of hinted at before. Instead of turning into a child and getting hugged to death by Charles as he does in the book, in the movie Mr. Dark gets Mr. Cougar's fate, and in the climax when Jim is saved from the carousel, Mr. Dark is trapped on it, riding it forward until he decays and dies. Which, this one I do sort of get. It's more cinematic and less potentially problematic than a man just hugging a child to death. I can see where there might have been an argument against that when the script was being written. Also, at the end, the carnival kind of just gets sucked up into the sky in a giant tornado instead of just kind of deflating as the performers all escape like it does in the book. Okay, that's everything spoiled. Everyone who left the room can come back in. While there will unavoidably still be some light spoilers from here on out, you're past the point of having the whole story covered, so you can still have a little bit of mystery. So, now that we've thoroughly covered the plot, let's really get into the work. There are several themes at play in Something Wicked This Way Comes. The most obvious one I will touch on first, and only briefly, because otherwise this channel is going to seem redundant, since this theme is also the largest theme of the last work I covered on this channel, The Halloween Moon, which, please go check it out if you haven't. If you like Something Wicked This Way Comes, I think that might be up your alley too. Anyway, the theme I'm alluding to is our relationship to aging and the universal dissatisfaction that people have with their current age, in one direction or another. In sharp juxtaposition to each other, we have Jim Nightshade, who is eagerly running towards adulthood and willing to do whatever it takes to get there as soon as possible, and then we have Charles Halloway, who seems to do nothing but live in regret of what he sees as a wasted youth and his feelings of being so much older in his mind than his wife and child. As seen by one, he laments people in town thinking his wife is his daughter, and he feels too old to play catch with Will and do the things he considers normal in a father-son relationship, despite that not being a one-size-fits-all type situation. Similarly, although less of a player, we have Miss Foley, who is so desperate to regain her youth, she ends up sacrificing her autonomy for it. In the book, this is her being given too much of a good thing and spun back too far, becoming a child who is on her own entirely with no one to believe her, and in the film, she's only brought back to her early 20s but loses her eyesight shortly after the first time she sees herself once more young and beautiful, and is then at the mercy of her fake man-child nephew to lead her around as she's forced to join the carnival. The contrast to both of these opposing points are both Will and Mr. Dark, with Will content to be the age he is, taking life as it comes and growing up when he naturally is going to, and Mr. Dark, who by use of the carousel never has to age at all. Again, I won't say too much about this theme for redundancy's sake, but if you are interested in a work that deals with the fear and horror of growing up, but from an adolescent view in regards to approaching adulthood, again, check out The Halloween Moon. It's neat. Moving on. The next large theme present in the work is the one that Ray Bradbury himself said he set out to talk about with this work, and it's a simple one. Light versus dark, good versus evil. But simple is not necessarily negative if you do it right. Not everything has to be hereditary. Sometimes you just set out to tell a story about light and darkness. And you can see this theme repeated across multiple elements of the book. One of the most obvious examples being within the two child protagonists of Will and Jim. Will is born 1 minute before midnight, still on October 30th, and Jim 1 minute after on Halloween. Will is described as light-haired and pale-eyed, with Jim having dark hair and deep green eyes. Even their names, with Will's last name Holloway, meaning Holy Spring, and Jim's being Nightshade, literally a poisonous plant. Jim is described in the book as being Will's shadow, or more or less his dark counterpoint on account of this. Additionally, Jim's desire to be older and envy of Will's age, and Will having both a mother and a father, along with him being more easily swayed toward the idea of joining the Carnival, largely for these reasons, positions him as a darker counterpoint. There's even a line in the book when the boys are first visiting the library and Charles says, "Middle name's Moriarty, right, Jim?" painting Jim as the dark version and rival to what would then be Will's Sherlock Holmes. Although based purely on the nature of shadows, Will can also be seen as Jim's shadow because Will is always the one chasing Jim, and in many instances happy to follow him without much argument. To some extent, we can see this theme repeated in the characters of Mr. Dark and Charles Holloway as well. Besides again the obvious with Mr. Dark's name being, well, dark, he's positioned as Charles Holloway's opposite in multiple other ways. He's the temptation and promise of the father that Jim doesn't have, despite Charles, to some extent, attempting to stand in, sort of. Mr. Dark is always changing and eternally young, while Charles is borderline obsessed with the idea that he is too old and that he is stagnant and unchanging. Charles sees himself as the dull old man who works in the library, while Mr. Dark is vibrant, covered in tattoos, the leading of a traveling carnival, and about as far from boring as you can get. They also, in this theme of opposition, can be seen as the potential future counterpoints of Will and Jim as they are when we first find them at the beginning of the novel. Before they change and grow throughout the events of the story, they could be seen to be on track to become their fathers, both biological and not, with Will happy to stay the course, not make waves, follow in his father's footsteps, and Jim, on the other hand, never satisfied and always wanting more, wanting adventure to change his age. There is never enough excitement for Jim. Perhaps less obviously, but still following this theme, is the actual geography and setting of the book itself. The fictional town of Greentown, Illinois is very much an idealized version of a turn-of-the-century American town. It has a similar feeling to Main Street USA and Disneyland, in that it not only is set in a sort of nebulous ballpark of time, again something Wicked has speculated to take place between 1910 and 1930, but is presented as a squeaky clean ideal of American life, where neighbors all know each other and no one locks their doors at night and the streets are safe to play in. By contrast, the Carnival is a dangerous unknown. It's impermanent, unsafe, full of strangers and unknown variables. It's change. It's the outside world bleeding into an insular community which had more or less kept itself separate from that outside for precisely those reasons. But, because of these reasons too, it is also excitement and escape.
Cougar and Dark's Pandemonium Shadow Show comes to a small town, appearing in the middle of the night. The lights of the carnival draw the townspeople, all dissatisfied with their lives, into halls of mirrors, dark rides, the carnival clown's uncomfortable laughter, and the call of the barker that offers wonder, mysteries, and something new, something different. It's ultimately something wicked, as the title suggests. The small town as the setting for something dark to emerge has haunted the American imagination over the last century. It's the little California village of Santa Mira where the pod people descend, a place where everybody knows everyone and there's just the one local doctor in the 1956 invasion of the Body Snatchers. In 1960, Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone offered A Stop at Willoughby, the story of an anxiety-ridden businessman given the chance at new life in a little burg. The viewer learns of the true horror of such seemingly anodyne hopes when the dream ends and we face a more believable bleakness.
The carnival itself, and how it offers fantasy and temptation, is something important to examine, and how the work not only engages in its own themes, but the historical context of when it was set. As I touched on earlier, based off context clues, Something Wicked takes place sometime around the Great Depression, a time when the collective morale of the American people was at an all-time low, and carnivals were a relatively inexpensive way to escape that. Additionally, like I mentioned, set in the novel in small-town America, there is the safety of that seclusion, but there's also monotony. People long for something outside the confines of their small rural town, and often have little to no opportunity to experience anything outside of this very sheltered reality. People would dream of the adventure and opportunity of the outside world, but lack the ability to actually experience that outside world due to the pressure of conformity, and an even larger issue at the time, money. Even people managing to not fully buckle under the financial weight of the Great Depression were not in a position to afford travel. So when the carnival came to town, it offered a window into that outside world that they would not otherwise experience. And people couldn't always discern that this was a distorted and inaccurate idea of what the outside world had to offer. Under the veneer of fantasy and escape, there was an inherent darkness. A lot of these carnivals at the turn of the century made their bread and butter off of human exploitation. For instance, the freak shows, which are referenced as Something Wicked. But often these were just exploiting people with disabilities or other ethnicities for financial gain, to an audience who would see it as nothing but spectacle and not discern this. So in terms of the text, when the carnival comes to fictional every-town American city Greentown, it is seen as a promise, showing the people of this small town a different reality and a chance at things they've only dreamed about, and in some cases are desperate to do just about anything to get. The promise and appeal of this fake idealized reality where all your wildest dreams come true means Mr. Dark has to actually do very little to sway the townsfolk to play into his hands. The promise of an escape from the monotony is enough to have them walk directly into the lion's mouth without question. Which also bleeds into one of the other large themes of the book, and even more so the film. The repeated idea of the monkey's paw or be careful what you wish for trope. The carnival promises you your heart's desires, but the way in which you receive those dreams is twisted. This is something that the work immediately clues you into by its title if you know what you're looking for. The title, Something Wicked This Way Comes, originates from Macbeth, the main theme of which being the danger of ambition and how it can destroy you. If you take a broader definition of ambition as desire itself, then the carnival functions to make a person desire their downfall. And while this applies to multiple characters in the work, this specifically can relate to Jim as our figure who is damned by ambition. After all, Jim's blind pursuit of change and cheating time nearly results in his death when he's finally able to ride the time-bending carousel. While none of these themes might seem as deep and revolutionary as some of our more modern horror works that fall into the dreaded term elevated horror, it's impossible to not recognize the influence this work has had on horror going forward. The idea of a cycle of evil that repeats every few decades, centered in a small town revolving around children, would influence and be lovingly parroted by Stephen King in horror classic It. King is admitted to being largely influenced by Bradbury, and between the aforementioned plot points, the antagonist being circus-themed, and Pennywise also being a being that feeds off of fear, it's hard not to see Bradbury's hand in it. Especially when King himself has alluded to it also being a major inspiration for his works Needful Things and The Dead Zone as well. Beyond King, while Cabinet of Dr. Caligari might have been the first instance of dark carnival media, Something Wicked is what made that imagery into a full horror trope. The influence of that can be seen as far as things like the fantasy novel The Night Circus, Sailor Moon Super S's season that features the Dead Moon Circus, and even completely out-of-pocket nonsense like the fever nightmare that is Pinocchio and the Emperor of the Night likely owe their birth to Bradbury and Something Wicked This Way Comes. That being said, all this talking is hungry work, so I'm sure you're starving. Why don't you go grab a popcorn ball and meet me back in the diner? Ooh.
Well, this is pretty fun, right? What do you guys think? Want to take a stab at making a classic, well, more or less classic, turn-of-the-century carnival food? Had you experienced the book and or the film version of Something Wicked This Way Comes prior to this trip to the diner? Drop your thoughts on the work, the food, and what your favorite piece of carnival-themed media is in the comments below. As always, recipe, recommendations, and sources are listed in the description below as well. And hey, if you enjoyed your stay here, maybe you'd think about liking and subscribing to see what we cook up next. And if you want to go even further, we've got a Patreon! A lot goes on in front of and behind the camera to make these videos, and every little bit helps us keep the lights on in the diner and the gas on the stoves. Patreons get fun perks like getting episodes early, access to the Horror Diner Discord, and possibly even exclusive cat pictures. And patrons of $5 and more get to be part of the Horror Diner Book Club, where every month you vote on a book for me to cover, and then you get to read along with me, and I make you an exclusive video, just for you, on Patreon. We've covered things like Bitterthorn by Kat Dunn, We Used to Live Here by Marcus Clewer, and What Hunger by Catherine Dang. You can find that all linked in the description, as well as links to where you can find us on Instagram, Bluesky, and TikTok. This has been Something Wicked This Way Comes. I've been Spooky Pie, and you have been amazing. Y'all come back now, you hear? Of course, Luke just went behind the curtain. Hi, Luke. He's not. Luke, you couldn't have done this when I didn't have a green screen? Really? Okay. I'm out of Barbie water. This is a tragedy. If I sound like a robot in this one too, I'm going to throw my computer into the ocean and quit YouTube and go and join the circus.
What on earth are my cats doing? Sorry, my cat just kicked my light 3 feet away from my face. Shifting because my back hurts. No, I can eat this gracefully.
What was a single book?
He's getting so mad at me.